Hello there. Well, I'm out today doing a bit of volunteer work for a chaplaincy thing for a bit of a motocross event. Hopefully I'm in focus here because I'm currently using a Metabones adapter that does not work with this camera I'm using an FX30. I was watching some stuff on CINE EI recently and I'm really curious, is it just an exposure tool or do you actually have the ability to change the information you're getting in the shadows and the highlights by using CINE EI? So currently I'm shooting in 800 ISO and I believe I've got the CINE EI at 200 from memory. I will be putting all the notes down below if I've got this wrong. But essentially what I'm trying today is just a few different shots to test the shadows and if you get more noise in them in a very dynamic shot when changing that CINE EI, does it actually change anything to the footage or is it just simply an exposure tool? This isn't something I've seen on YouTube and I'd love to find out, so come along with me. Let's find out if it actually changes the look of the footage or is this just an exposure tool? Here we go. Alright, so you'll notice with CINE EI I am dropping down in the values. I will show a bit more on this later in the video, but essentially if you put your value number higher than your ISO, you get a lot of grain, is what I've heard online, and I do experiment with this later in the video. Alright, so now I'm going to try this in the lower version of the 4K. So you've got the all intra, it's called in some cameras, or the SI mode from memory on Sony. I've just got back onto Sony to test this, so I'm still learning all the terminology for the specific types of recording. But you've got the kind of lower version of 4K. That's what I'm about to try out now. So the one before was obviously the all I, and the next one is the long GOP type format. So here we go, let's see if this makes any difference. This is my friend Mildred over here, currently on 800, and now we're going to switch through the different settings. Definitely pay attention to the hair on side of my friend Mildred. Now Mildred, don't move. Alright, this is 640. Mildred, you're a perfect model. Excuse the bikes in the background going past over there. Alright, 500 EI, again filming in CINE EI, meaning that we still stay at ISO 800 as the base. It's locked, but I'm just changing the EI mode. Alright, now we're 400 EI, still at plus 1.7 for exposure. Mildred, you are a legend, my friend. That is 320 EI. Alright, now I'm going to keep moving down. We're now at 250 EI. My friend Mildred, still being an absolute legend. And finally, we have 200 EI, again still on the base ISO of 800, locked in. This is the full CINE EI mode, this isn't flexible. Mildred, you can move on, my friend. You've been an absolute lovely model for the day. And there you have all the different exposures side by side, paying attention to the shadows and also the highlights of the hair that you can see on the front of the cow. Guys, I'm starting to get the feeling that Mildred might not be Mildred. Alright, so here I am back at home. I thought it'd be great to test CINE EI in a high contrast environment. Now I've got the ISO set to 2500 and currently I'm at that mid-range on the chart that I can throw up on the screen now at 2500 EI. I'm also going to test out the low range, the mid-range and the high range with some lights kind of coming nearly directly into camera. If you see the light behind me up here, I haven't got it straight down the lens. I was trying that earlier, but it just created a lot of flare and it was just, I guess, not blowing out the image. It was kind of just creating a lot of like a matte look to it. It was taking all the contrast away. So I thought, nah, what I'm going to do is have the beam hitting just above the lens up here. So that way it's not going to throw a ton of flare, take the contrast away, but you'll still get a nice brightness. Almost simulating the sun to a degree. Obviously that isn't a super bright light, nowhere near the sun. It's an LS60X from Aperture, or Lightstorm 60X. So I've got that about 50% at the moment, and I want to pay attention to how this, or these highlights up here, basically are affected by CINE EI when we go through those ranges. I was going to look at doing every single setting, but I thought it makes more sense in my opinion just to show the lowest, the mid, and the high. Because if we're out shooting outside and there's like a sunlit background, you know, kind of backlighting going on, Or if you're in an environment like this that's controlled with some backlighting, you want to know how those highlights are going to react and the shadows are going to react when you're playing with CINE EI. I've also got this little Godox light up here, this little tube light. I'll tell you what model it is. It is the LC500R. I thought that'd be good just to keep me a bit lit as I come down here and check the settings. And it's also helping light this little X-Rite color checker over here. These things are really great. I remember when I had an old, I think it was a Sony A6300. That's a couple of years ago now. I had one of those, and I lined it up with the colors in here in DaVinci Resolve, and I never got my colors looking that good out of a Sony camera. So I think now that I've switched back to Sony for a little while, just to experiment and see what I can do with their sensors, that I'll start using these, especially with the fact I have a music video shoot coming up this Sunday with my friend Mark Dunlop. I've shot a video for him before. I'll throw a bit of that up on the screen now, some of the shots that I have done with him on a past music video. A great mate, Christian brother as well. But I want to do the best service to that music video for the message of the song and for my friend, of course, as well. So yes, this is what I'm going to try. Gonna balance everything perfectly with good exposure to this color checker. I'm using 61% on my zebras. That's what the Sony website has recommended for the white. So I'm basically getting everything perfect to that when I'm going through these settings. So I'm getting my zebras just appear on this white, and then I'm going to expose to that and go through these settings. So here we go, ISO 2500. Let's switch over, first of all, to the lowest setting. Here we go. Alright, so this is at CINE EI 640 with an ISO of 2500. Pay attention to the shadows as well, is something I will say throughout this. Right now the shadows should be very clean, but I'm interested to see the recovery of these highlights up here coming from that light. Alright, ISO 2500 now with 2500 CINE EI. I will also say that the recording format I'm recording in the highest 4K setting, and I think it's about 250 megabits per second. So I'm using the CF Express Type A here as well. I'm trying to get the highest quality out of the camera. You can get the DCI 24p, but I thought I'm just going to stick to the 25 for now. But yes, again, this is the mid-range. Again, pay attention to the shadows and to the highlights as well. There might be a good bit of shadow detail in my shirt potentially to look at as well. Alright, only seeing the back of the camera as I was setting up this high setting, I could see Grain City already in those shadows. So this is still ISO 2500 and this is 10,000 CINE EI. So yes, very noisy. You can probably really see it in this t-shirt and any shadows on the, maybe even down here there might be some shadows in the blacks. But yeah, what's the highlights doing? I'm curious. I'm really interested to see in post when I start playing with this footage how the highlights react. I do love saving my shadows. I like, especially with Sonys, they tend to have a nasty noise floor if you're not careful. A lot of ugly grain muddiness in the shadows that you got to really watch out for. Especially with the in-camera kind of noise reduction. Yeah, it can get kind of muddy, and that's why I left Sony a while ago. But doing a bit more research on CINE EI, I'm curious to find out what I can do with this and really curious to see how far I can push this sensor. So I'm happy to sacrifice a bit of highlights. However, how good does it look? That's my question. That's why I'm doing this test. Now, I'm going to switch over to a bit of a brighter setting. I'm going to pump this light out to 100% and just really focus on that light now and see what kind of settings I'm going to get from it. Here we go. Now, this is currently at 2500 ISO and the CINE EI is 640. Again, pay attention to the shadows and how these highlights operate as I go through these settings. Alright, we're now at the mid-range, so this is 2500 CINE EI, again ISO 2500. Alright, and finally we are at CINE EI 10,000 on ISO 2500. What I might do though, I might even jump back to the first native ISO of 800 for this camera and do the same test through the different CINE EI ranges with this particular shot. I think that might be quite interesting to see the difference between the two base ISOs or the two dual native ISOs. Alright, here we go, switching over. Alright, now at ISO 800, I'm at CINE EI 200 and I've just had to adjust my little tube light here, which will be straight up above the little color checker there. I have to adjust that to 9%. Now, you're probably thinking, why am I putting light on this color checker? Why wouldn't I just have shadow in the foreground? I'm kind of imagining like this is my subject, basically. That's what I'm exposing to in front here. Again, getting perfect exposure according to Sony's website when dealing with S-Log. So right now on my back of my screen, I can see zebras just on that white strip at the top of my color checker. And I've still got that aperture light in the background set to 100%. So pay attention to how those highlights work or how they are affected by the CINE EI, and paying attention to the shadows. So again, 640 ISO, CINE EI 200. Alright, now at CINE EI 800. Now something I didn't mention before is between some of these shots I've had to put on an ND and sometimes take one off to get the right settings and the proper exposure. Again, according to all the things I've read on the Sony website. So if you see any flares, like this little green one sitting below the light, that is actually an effect of the ND that I'm putting on. Otherwise, don't look so much at the color shift, look more so at the noise that we're looking at, the highlights, how they're rolling off, and looking at the shadow noise. Alright, and this is the highest setting on the base native ISO of 800. So this is CINE EI 3200. I can see Grain City going on once again over here. A lot of people do recommend not to put the CINE EI higher in terms of numbers higher than your actual ISO that you're recording on, because it creates all this grain that you're seeing right now. A lot of people just recommend going lower. So mostly this test for me has been to just figure out what happens to the highlight roll off or the highlights in general when we change these settings, and how much noise is too much noise to deal with if I want to maybe protect some of those highlights. Okay, so I thought I'd do one final test. When you are recording with CINE EI, the ISO does stay the same. You're basically just changing the dynamic range and where it sits. So I thought instead of changing with my ND whenever I go between CINE EI and adjusting accordingly, I'm going to leave it exactly as it is right now on this setting. I've got 800 ISO and I've set it to CINE EI 800. So when I now switch to the lower and the higher settings in CINE EI, I'm going to leave these exposure adjustments I've made here exactly the same for all three settings, for all CINE EI settings, because it apparently will be recording 800 ISO regardless. You do notice this in your time frame as well on DaVinci Resolve. The clips will be darker if you're adjusting accordingly and setting exposure to the card with the zebras whenever you change the CINE EI. So this is currently at 800, and now I'm going to switch to the lower mode of CINE EI 200. Okay, so on the back of my screen it looks very dark, and right now it's basically getting more information in the shadows. Again, I've left the settings as I exposed them when I was on 800 CINE EI, and this internally is still recording at ISO 800 as well. So I'm interested to see how this goes with the highlights. Alright, so I'm now on the higher setting of CINE EI 3200. The camera is still internally recording 800 ISO, and what I'm seeing on the back of the screen is very bright. That is how CINE EI will work. So according to the Sony website, I should be getting far more highlights now with having this setting up higher. It's changing that dynamic range to basically grab the highlights, and it will be sacrificing shadow information. So I'm assuming when I get this on the computer, this is going to be very noisy where the arm of that sofa is over there. Okay, so that was very interesting. I kept all my exposure adjustments the same. I didn't move the ND. All I did was just change the CINE EI setting in the camera. I had originally again set to ISO 800 with CINE EI 800. That's how I exposed and what I exposed for. Again, this is to a grey card that you saw in the shot there with 41% on the zebras. You can also alternatively do 61% zebras on the white, but yeah, I just used the grey card on that one. Now, I'm going to try the same thing again with this talking headshot with this darker t-shirt I have on. Yesterday when I was filming in the garage, I fully thought, okay, this is changing where the dynamic range sits, either getting more shadows or more highlight information. But now I'm starting to think after doing that test, is this just an exposure tool? Have I been completely wrong about this? This is why I did this test, to really figure this out. And I'm so glad I've tried this. So here we go. I'm going to switch over to CINE EI 200. All right, now that we're switched over, does the highlight roll-off look any different? Does my t-shirt look cleaner? Less noise? Essentially on the screen right now, this image looks very, very dark because again, I haven't changed any settings of my exposure after I've changed CINE EI. Apologies on the noise in the background there, my daughter's doing some crafts. I'm now going to switch over to CINE EI 3200 to see if it adds noise. Alright, and now this is a higher setting, 3200 CINE EI, while still recording at ISO 800. I'm very excited to put this on the computer and see how it looks. According to what I've understood from reading a lot of articles and trying to understand CINE EI, there should be a ton of noise right now in my shirt, yet the highlight should be rolling off a lot nicer. Or, if this hasn't changed at all between these three shots I've just done, has this proven that essentially CINE EI is just an exposure tool? It's not actually changing the dynamic range. This is going to be really interesting. This may change my findings and my thoughts on CINE EI and my thoughts on continuing to shoot on Sony if these last three shots haven't changed anything. Alright, I hope these tests have been useful to anyone there at home who might be watching this using a Sony camera with CINE EI. Essentially, CINE EI is one of the main reasons that brought me back to Sony. One was the autofocus. I do shoot a lot of events. It wasn't my intention to, but right now I just feel a bit of the Lord's leading in that. When I'm shooting a lot of friends' weddings, a lot of friends have asked me recently to shoot their weddings. And yeah, I keep getting called into events, which I don't actually mind too much. I do enjoy them. The editing's different. I'm not a big fan of editing, but I do enjoy shooting events and, being able to test out cameras there as well. So yeah, I basically felt led to come back to Sony and really test these sensors. And I think something as well I found myself and something I might encourage other filmmakers with is I was often buying cameras. My friends and I have bought through so many brands. I've tried camera after camera after camera, trying to find that perfect image. And after a while, I started thinking, if I can't get a good image out of most cameras, I'm probably the problem. I'm the one who's not exposing properly or color grading properly. So I thought, hey, I've had FX30s before. I never liked their image. However, with more knowledge on CINE EI, can I pull a good image out of this? I wanted to challenge myself as well. Now, I'll admit, coming back to Sony, putting the colors up on the screen, straight away I've gone, ooh, this is going to take a bit of grading. These greens I don't like. There is a lot of like plasticiness to the image straight out of camera that I find very frustrating because I like a filmic image. But can I test myself? Can I push myself to be a better cinematographer, a better camera operator, better color grader to get a good image out of this? Now, I would have loved to have done this test with some Sirui Nightwalker lenses that I have arriving hopefully tomorrow because the shoot is on Sunday for my friend. Looking at the tracking, it says it should be arriving tomorrow, but with those, I can pull more of a vintage look out of the sensor. I can kind of get rid of that digital sharpness that a lot of Sonys have. I will admit, I have watched movies that are shot with high-end cinema cameras from Sony, like, the Venice cameras, some of the Cine Ultra line throughout that range. I'll admit, I watched Top Gun Maverick yesterday. Some really cool ways of filming, how they were strapping these Sony cameras into the cockpit of these planes and sending these actors up to get these shots and then wait until they came back to check them. Really cool way of filming. I thought that was pretty epic. But I'll admit, I wasn't a fan of the look of the footage. And that's like on a high-end production where these guys know their stuff. These very high-level people working really well with the colors. And I think, yeah, if I watch a movie like that and I still think it is a little digital, it's going to be one heck of a challenge for me to try and grade this really low-end cinema camera, the lowest you can get, the FX30. It's going to be a real challenge for me to get a pleasing image to me out of this sensor, if even with the highest end Sony cameras when I'm watching an actual production, like a fully paid multi-million-dollar one where there's experts working on it. It's going to be a good challenge for me, and sometimes that's good to challenge ourselves. A quick thing I'll share as well, that's something I like to do with this channel as well, is to share a bit of meaning. Being that Christian filmmaker, there's actually been a study done on video games with their levels of difficulty, if they're too difficult, it actually creates aggression in people. It's interesting. People think violent video games cause aggression. It's actually the difficulty of video games that frustrate people so much. Yet, if the level of difficulty is way too low, people put the game down because they're like, it's too easy, it's boring now, I've done everything. Whereas if you set that level just right, you're actually going to get enjoyment out of it. And I think it's the same thing for life. If we don't challenge ourselves, we're going to get really bored. If we set ourselves too hard of a challenge up here, we're going to get frustrated as well. So it's knowing when to call it, when it's just too hard, and go, nah, this is beyond me. I'm not enjoying this. This isn't fun, with different challenges we might face. But at the same time, if we're sitting down here in Comfort City, we're going to get bored of life very quickly. And I think it's around this range where we learn a lot. I'd even say a little bit towards the top of our challenge that we learn and we feel passionate and we grow. So in a weird way, that's why I went back to Sony. Many of my friends have heard how much I have complained about Sony in the past, but I want to challenge myself and think, can I get an image I like out of these cameras just by knowing more, by doing more research and just seeing how these sensors work to get a better quality image? And I challenge you guys to do the same.